All right, Lions fans, here's another one. I'm going to talk on the subject of Swartz and how Swartz and Caldwell basically put in the preparations for Patricia. Um, Bob Quinn is, as we know, how he got the position and so forth, and who he inherited Caldwell. Caldwell did a justice in this regard. He was able to establish somewhat of a foundation, and I'm not talking about the wins and loss foundation, but just from a mental capacity. If I may say, when Belichick took over New England, I believe Parcells had established that foundation there. So all the heavy lifting, pretty much Bill Belichick didn't have to do. All Bill Belichick had to do, which was actually it actually shows the genius of Bill Belichick. All he had to do is round or round off the edges of what Parcell was doing. So this is the same thing what Patricia is doing from actually coming from the reigns or the previous regimes of Swartz and Caldwell. Well, of course, we know Caldwell came after Swartz, and Swartz have established a losing culture because that culture came from one of the regimes of let's see, Mordenweg, Marinelli, and I believe Miss Mariucci. So that had to be tore down, so to speak, and at the same time, I mean, as Lions fans, you understand like how much hell, just from a spectator's perspective, how it is to bear the what was it 8 years that Millen was in office, and then to endure another, I believe, 5 years, or sort maybe somewhere around there of Mayhew. So Swartz and Caldwell had to establish something from that. That's pretty hard to do when you have in like when you have a GM that really doesn't have a focus. It just has a position. Whatever it did, whatever it took to get the position, has the position, but it doesn't know anything. Now that goes back as far as your owner of your franchise or your business having a layout or having an understanding of the profession that they're in. Now, from my understanding, I believe the Lions organization was like it's like a hobby for the Fords. Their cash cow was business, from the motor company on down. That was their, I would say that was their income. But the hobby or the toy was the Lions football team. So I don't believe they had much interest in that as if it succeeds or if it fails. But since it was successful in revenue, because people was paying to see football, regardless if they were winning or not, I mean, of losing or not, they was paying to see that. So moving that aside, and let's say uh, Martha Ford took over, she basically demolished all of that, all of that regime that came from Millen Mayhew and up under her late husband. She demolished all that. Excuse me. Now, when Quinn came and took over, he took over the landscape, and this is where the average fan may not see or understand or even care to understand the ramification that it takes to establish a winning culture. When you over let's say since '91, when you look over decades of football teams actually building an establishment, either they're coming from a losing establishment or a winning establishment, but any which way it goes, they are either in the playoffs on a consecutive basis or they in pursuit of a Super Bowl title. You could become very envious and very impatient. So the the landscape of things, of the the tolerance that goes out the window. So I say that to say this is what Patricia, this is what Quinn had to endure. He had to inherit, or well, let me see, he didn't have to. He inherit when he took the job. I'm sure the pitch was it's going to take 5 years to get this team to respectability. It's going to take 5 years to get this team to respectability. Excuse me. 3 years to be in contention. So within those 2 years, I mean, with the first, or let's say this is Patricia's first. I mean, going into his third year. So let's say Quinn was here for 5 years. I don't know the numbers. I'm just going by whatever off the air, out there, and say he was here for 5 years. And so 2 of those years they was like 9-7. They was winning, but they wasn't a winning organization, or there wasn't a respected organization. And I believe that's the only way that I would identify a winning team or a winning culture if it's respected throughout the league. And I don't believe this team became respected until Patricia got here. Now, with that being said, let's jump into the Swartz and Caldwell preparation for Patricia. What Swartz and Caldwell did, they established a foundation that actually consists of an offensive and defensive mindset. Of course, Caldwell came from a offensive perspective, and Swartz came from a defensive perspective. Each one of them established, and if you notice, if you'd have put both of those two together, you would have a winning team. It's funny with Swartz defense, who has spent years in Tennessee as a defensive coordinator, who pretty much maximized ins and outs of the defense, right? So he pretty much came ready for that. As you see, when they came in, they not the first year, but the second year, the third year, they was making progression upon the Swartz defensively, and I believe they was a top team by the time they got Sue. All right, and or if not, when they established Sue or got Sue in Van der Bosch, they became a top defense, a decent defensive team, and so that established that. But Caldwell came in. It's interesting because the defense is somewhat established through Swartz, so and that's ready to carry over as a foundation to Caldwell. Yet still, the offense wasn't established up under Swartz. So here comes Jim Caldwell to establish that, and this is where I believe Matthew Stafford took a turn in his career, where he became a little bit more settled. He was to start to understand himself. Early on, before Caldwell, he would overthrow pass. Everything was a bullet. Everything was just really what it is. So when the average fan said like says Matthew Stafford is a great quarterback, he had to. It's two tales of Matthew Stafford. There was the erratic Matthew Stafford that you can root for, but he just wasn't consistent. And then as Caldwell got a hold of him, he slowed the game down, even without a run game or targeting the tight end or having a target as a tight end. He still was able to actually somewhat tweak Matthew Stafford to calm down. He was a gunslinger nonetheless. Yet still, the timing of the ball was coming out good, or the accuracy was kicking in. When to step in, when to step out. Matthew Stafford was coming in more of a well-rounded quarterback, and I want to contribute that towards to Caldwell. Now, with that being said, this is what Caldwell and Swartz established. Now, ironically, all the basically of all the Caldwell and Swartz players that they assembled is basically off the team. This is why I think this is what makes it so great for Patricia. What Quinn did, Quinn is doing what Bill Belichick did. He took what Parcells did, and he basically just sculptured his image off the foundation of all the dirty work that Parcells did. And so this is what Quinn is doing. Now, a fan may say that what is not equating, or it's not equivalent to wins and wins and everything. But it takes when you are when the way the teams were established up under Swartz and up under Caldwell, and let's say up under Millen and up under Mayhew, the teams were assembled. You're talking about from those who had the positions of the not agents, but the financial advisors and everything up top had to be rooted out. Everything had to go, and that's where we give the applause to Martha Ford. But Quinn not only had to come in with a plan, he has to shape what's already been implemented. And this team has already been structured in a certain way. So he's trying to bring what he learned up under Bill Belichick over here. And at the same time, in the midst of that, while he's trying to shape what's established here by what he learned, is making his own identity. You see how that works? So this is what steps in for Patricia. Now, Quinn sees this. He saw what the two coaches have done prior to Patricia, and he learned from that. He took a lot of things from both, even though he wasn't the GM over Schwartz. If he was, they would have probably been a better team than they were up under Mayhew. I believe he would have handled the Calvin Johnson situation better, and he would handle the Sue situation better. He would have handled a lot of situations better. He would have got something out of it if he couldn't retain those players. And at the same time, I think they probably would have wanted to play up under Quinn because of the sense of direction. And it's like that's why I believe why the Jamie Collison, the the Sheltons, the Vitais, why they all want to come here. Money is one thing, but it's another thing when they are, excuse me, they can see the direction of where the GM is going, where the organization is going, versus up under Millen and Mayhew, you have no idea. You strictly are coming there for the pay. You're not coming for respectability. You're not coming for anything else. So with that being said, let's move a little further. All right. Now let's get down to Underling and actually Bevel. Okay, let's see here. I'm reading over these notes. This when Quinn saw what those coaches has established with Swartz and he's molding, he's getting out of those two regimes the much as he possibly can. He's taking as much as he can to from players to development and so forth. And if the foundation can be shaped, if not, if we need to be tore down, he's taking all that into consideration. Now, with that, he had to within those two previous regimes, he was able to bring in Patricia. Now, what Patricia is doing, he is actually a combination of both. Even though he's known as a defensive minded guy, he is an offensive guy based upon his defense. So, in other words, if he's going to be a good defensive coordinator or attribute on the defensive side, that means you're going to have to be able to see the offense. And so, what Patricia needed was somebody to help develop him as a coach, and that's where I think where Paul Pasqualoni came in. He came in for that reason to help him develop as a coach, when and when not to. Because when he first came in, he came in very raw. By the second year, he changed, he altered. And I believe he was learning how to alter as a coach, not as a coordinator, but as a coach. That does mean that you, as a coordinator, or where you once was as a coordinator, has to take a step back. So Patricia had to learn he had to grow from being a coordinator to being a coach. That means relinquishing some of the power. But if you're going to relinquish some of that power, you're going to have to designate to somebody who's capable of handling it. So the first year he got here, he had Jim Bakuda as the offensive coordinator. And so that wasn't going in the direction where he saw fit that best. From a defensive guy, he saw the offense going in a different direction. And maybe Quinn stepped in and said, like, well, I want to be more of a balanced team for Stafford. Stafford is the guy that I don't have to do too much with. I think Stafford. I think he maybe saw Stafford's coming to his own, that he's matured, and all he just Stafford just need to do is just be to sit there and allow all the other pieces come together, and Stafford just basically be the icing on the cake. So, with that being said, But however, with Patricia, Patricia still need to be tweaked as a coach, and that's why I think Paul Pasqualoni helped him. He that Paul Pasqualoni, of course, was a defensive coordinator, but I believe he taught him how to mature. In other words, get control of himself. When and when not to. I think you got a couple of ex players that said that Patricia got better the second year versus the first year. The first year, he's raw. Everything was above his head. Everything was. I'm sorry, he was drowning, and he could say with a straight face that he wasn't, but he was drowning that first year. People may see the results of his defense, actually his stamp on defense, that it was pretty good, but yet and still, he wasn't pretty good as making the transition from coordinator to head coach. Now he needs balance, and what I mean by that, this is where a guys like Bevel come in at. Bevel by far has a track history of winning as a coordinator, but it wasn't going to be just okay. Take this an example with Patricia. You're going to get a tale of two types of characteristics. You're going to get a guy who is mentally tough, who is basically edgy. Let's say it that way. He's edgy, and then you're going to get a guy who is like, let me see. He has a demeanor of being. I don't want to say in your face type, but he's sort of laid back. He's edgy, but in your face, slight, laid back. And I think he had to learn how to master that as a coach versus as a coordinator. When you work in just one side of the ball or one very specific group, you can be very direct. And his approach probably with the defense with the defense, he probably approached it the same way how he did it when he was in New England. He can approach those guys because they was up under a tougher environment. Here in the Lions organization is very sensitive because it's based upon losing. There's only when you get hurt, you're extremely sensitive. You're vulnerable to as far as like of certain approaches or a certain kind of approach. With that being said, let's keep going. All right. Underling, I believe, brings out the very best in Patricia. So in other words, we was talking about Patricia had to delegate some of the reins, or if not the reins, of being a coordinator to someone who's qualified. This is why I believe Underling have proved that. And I don't know if he was a defensive back or whatever position he was with Philadelphia, but not just 1 year, but the years that he was there or whatever, or if he started off with New England. They're familiar with each other to a certain degree, but at the same time, he understands Underling has his own creativity. And Patricia's the type of guy that he don't probably trust certain people. That's why I believe Paul Pasqualoni was here. He trusts him to help him evolve. And I think Underling is going to actually help show the picture of what Patricia sees and even put his own stamp on it. I don't know if Underling going to be here long because I believe if I see correctly, this defense is going to go from being one of the last ones to one of the top ones, and he's going to get a shot at being a head coach. He's going to get calls for being a head coach. Underling is. So, with that being said, now let's go over, of course, we just talked about Bevel. Bevel is self-made. He already came in with a resume. He already came in with a track history of actually being successful. Underling having as a coordinator, but in the as a position coach, where he was, dealing with what he had to deal with in Philadelphia. I believe he dealt with last year a lot of injuries, and still was able to do a decent job. Well, in other words, he was respected by offensive coordinators. All right, so Underling and Bevel actually Quinn brought in. I believe that's their hiring. I believe Quinn is looking after the best interest for Patricia. Like the ability of a GM or the foresight of a GM has to be able to see all angles. He can't just afford to see the facts. He can't afford to see what you did last year. He has to see it from the past, the present, the future. He has to see it from all angles. And that's why I like Quinn because he's seeing it from all different perspectives versus trying to throw something on the wall and see if it sticks. Like the investment was, if the offense was, he's going to give that play set to Bevel. What guys do you need? What do you need? What recipe? What ingredients do you need? I'll get that. He got those for him. And let's say if Bevel's saying, I want an aggressive line, because overall it's not just the protection of Stafford. I I think Quinn's vision is, or even for Ford's, Martha Ford vision could be for Matthew Stafford. I don't want to see him do anything. In other words, I want to see him play, but with the least amount of responsibility as possible. I just want him to be able to enjoy himself based upon what he gave to this organization. That's just me coming off the top. But at the same time, Quinn has to, if that's Martha Ford's vision, Quinn has to produce that. So he has to get the pieces in place to make that happen. And this is why I think he went to Bevel. And as well as I think last year, or I think it was last offseason, they went to Stafford and said, what kind of pieces do you need? What are you looking for? And Stafford could have said tall receivers because he probably was adjusted with Calvin Johnson and so forth. That's why I think they went out in a whole in a direction of going after tall. Even if it's tight ends, it was just tall receivers. Now, I don't believe that they was able to do any of the things because nothing was in place. What I mean by that offensive line was atrocious. It was just terrible. And so one of the first things, if not that I think this is Bevel deal, even though they could have came together as a unit, the three-headed monster, Quinn, Patricia, and Bevel, they could have came together like, we need to do something about this offensive line. But we need to have I don't think they had nothing. I don't think they had anything to work with until the development of Frank Ragnow. Excuse me. Until the development of Frank Ragnow. When Frank Ragnow started to develop into like this all pro, from a decent, you could say decent, serviceable, if not Pro Bowl caliber guard, into this possible, Pro Bowl caliber. I mean Pro Bowl all pro type center. He's only going to get better, barring anything catastrophic. So I believe that was the deal that what Bevel was saying when it came to at the end, when the season came to a conclusion. Let's get this offensive line and let's start with this anchor here. Have you noticed everybody else is pretty much expendable on that offensive line? Don't get me wrong, Decker is still there. They lost Wagner, they lost Glasgow, and arguably outside of Ragnow, you could say those probably were your best two, other than Ragnow, your best linemen, and they let them walk. So, all right, let's go here. Underling and Bevel will round off the finishing touches of the two coordinators. Before them, which were the two head coaches, which was Swartz and Caldwell, and they would develop an identity for Patricia. Out of this, Patricia is basically capitalizing off the previous regime. If anybody paying attention, he's capitalizing off the previous regime. And a fan may say, "How is that so?" He got rid of all the players. That because you get rid of the players, don't mean you get rid of the foundation. How they established it, what they did. Now, they may not. Caldwell and Swartz may not have all the players to finish the job that they started. Yet and still, that don't mean you can't use that foundation as either a template, or you can use it as a foundation to build what you're going to build on top of that. And I believe that's what Quinn did when he hired Underling. Underling is going to bring the very best out of Patricia. Which, in other words, Patricia's not going to have to do the defensive coordinating anymore. And if so, he's only going to have to do one aspect of it. Even though he's going to, let's say 90% of the time, let's say 85 plus of the time, he's going to be as a head coach. That's going to be his focus, because I believe the rest of the percentage of the time, he can actually, the team will be. Let's say it this way, if Stafford is able, let's say Stafford plays 16 games at the level that he played last year, that you're talking about a matured Stafford. You don't have to worry about him on the offense. So you don't have to worry about clock management. You don't have to worry about the nuances. That's what made New England so good when they had Tom Brady, because you don't have to worry about the things on the field per much. I mean, so as much as well as they did defensively. As long as you have a leader on the defense, you don't have to worry about that. It would pretty much be like a well-oiled machine to take care of itself. But if that's not the case, then Patricia has to be in every place. He has to coach the coordinator. He has to coach the defensive coordinator. He has to coach everything. And actually, the coach is like a management overall of what the coordinators doing their job and the players pretty much doing their job and so forth. The line coaches and everything doing their job. He's just a guy just bring it all together. So that is my take on Underling of why he's going to be actually a great addition to this team. Of course, he has no experience as a defensive coordinator, but he actually has experience as a defensive guy. So he wouldn't have to carry the load as a defensive coordinator. He could still go to Patricia, like, what do you want? What do you see? And I believe if I see it correctly, Underling can go to Patricia and say, what type of defense do you want? Okay, I can do this. And even in the area where he says, like, I'm really struggling with the creativity to do that, Patricia can step in as the part-time coordinator and say, well, add this. And if you really look at it, that's how Bill Belichick was able to do it so many years. He had his offensive coordinator basically did all the heavy lifting, and he just fine-tuned it. And that's what a good coach would do. That's how Andy Reid was able to be so successful with Kansas City. It was already fine tuned. Majority of like the one hit wonders, like the first time coaches comes and they strike oil, at these teams, because things have already been established. All they have to do is basically round it off or cut off some edges and basically put somewhat of a creative stamp to it. And because it's already ready to go, the previous regime wasn't able to get it over the hump, over the mountain, or whatever. So that's why I think that Underling and Bevel is going to round out. They're going to finish the work that Caldwell and Swartz wasn't able to finish. And even though the Caldwell and Swartz had nothing to do with Patricia or even Quinn in that matter, besides Caldwell, Quinn is going to be the genius that he is, and he's going to use all that to his advantage. And this is what makes Patricia so good, because Quinn and Patricia learned that from Bill Belichick, how to use something that was already established to your advantage. Take, for example, if you want to go for how they did it, particularly they do it with players. You throw a cast off player. I mean, you give away a player, and if they could see something that their team is missing and that player is offering, even though you cast him off, he could be a first round pick, and you consider a bust up under a team that's losing, right? That needs all the pieces to make that player great. Bill Belichick would look at, like, okay, I need a type of player that does this, and they'd be like, well, Kyle Van Noy does that. Well, make them an offer and get them over here, and that's what they did, and that's what the great organizations do. You have something established, like John Lynch. I mean, not John Lynch. Lynch. I think it's John Lynch. What he did with the 49ers. 49ers was already established based upon what Jim Harbaugh did. He established a foundation there. Now, a fan may say, like, well, you can't really say that because they got all new players, all whatever, but you're not talking about starting all over. If a team had a taste of success, you don't have to start that over. You may have to rebuild the players, because the players may have to win as far as they can go. Or you may just look at it. It may not the situation. The problem may not be the players. The problem may be just upper management. The problem may not be upper management. It may be the financial situation. It could be anything. It could be a basic situation that can stop it from going forward. If you look at the Schwartz team, what stopped them from going forward was the financial stability, the financial situation. They ran out of money. Their money was tied with Calvin Johnson, Ndamukong Suh, and Matthew Stafford. They had nothing else really to play with. They couldn't finish the completion. Of course, you get the Burlesons, you get the different players to come to Van der Bosch and so forth, and the Tullocks to come in, but you couldn't complete it because you ran out of money. because your money was tied up with those three horses. So sometimes an organization, it could be just that. And if you look at Quinn, what he did, he removed the financial situation as a problem. Now they are ahead of the curve in that area, and they were able to get talent, young talent, as well as established talent. All right, Lions fan, we gone.